So let's talk about a very well-known passage in the book of Luke. In Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55, we have what we normally call the Magnificat. This is Mary's exaltation when she finds out from the angel that she is with child, and that child is to be the deliverance of Israel. The child is Jesus, right? So I would encourage you to read that passage, those 10 verses. But we need to talk about a little bit of background before we get into talking about those verses. I have mentioned before Genesis 12, 1-3. It is there in those 3 verses that Yahweh makes himself known to Abraham and calls Abraham out of his homeland to a land that God will show him, and promises him 3 things. Promises him offspring. I'll make a great nation out of you. Promises him land. Go to the land that I will show you. And blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Right? And in you, all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. Mary kind of revisits some of that theme, because Israel split into 2, as we talked about. Judah went into exile in Babylon and comes back. And when they came back, that idea, that mentality of exile remains. And that impacts political life, it impacts cultural life, it impacts the various Jewish sects that are born at that time of the exile. Because this huge promise of land becomes everything. In fact, my favorite psalm, I like the blues, right? I like to play the blues on my guitar. I like to listen to the blues, although it can be really depressing music sometimes, but not all the time, and it's really fun to play. But Psalm 137 is like, well, in fact, many of these lament psalms, that is, they are psalms of lament, stories of hardship in the Psalms. Psalm 137 is my favorite blues psalm. In fact, I think I just coined the term. I should use that, blues psalm. In exile, the writer says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept for Zion. And our captors said to us, 'Come sing us one of those songs of Zion.' But how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" They'd lost the land, they'd lost their homes, they'd lost the temple. They'd lost their identity. The exile is the theological crisis of the Old Testament. In many ways, it's a continuing theological crisis in the New Testament. And so when Mary comes onto the scene, this is the context. Now Rome is in charge. They're back in their homeland, right? They came back from exile, but that exile mentality is still there. Plus, they're no longer free. Judah had been a free country, except for a very brief period of time, about 150 years before Mary, until about 60 years before Mary. For that brief period of time, there was some freedom, but it was still a relative freedom. And now they're under the crushing requirements of Rome. And so different avenues open up for how one deals with these occupiers, which is essentially what Rome is. I mean, think about that. Think about what it would be to live in occupation. That's what they're living, right? And so you have people that are wanting to kill the Romans. That group's the Zealots. That's one group. And Jesus had one of his disciples that was a zealot. You have groups that are wanting to cooperate with the Romans through the renewed temple structure. Those are the Sadducees. You have another group that wants to cooperate with the Romans in some way and another. Some of them are kind of separatist and nationalist through the synagogue system, and those are the Pharisees. So Sadducees are associated with the temple. Pharisees are associated with the synagogues. The synagogues grow up out of the exile in Babylon. And so those are religious groups, but they're also political groups. And so this connectivity that we see today all around the world, not just the United States, between religion and politics, it has always been thus. Will it always be thus? Hopefully not. But it's the world in which we live now, and has been the world in which we've lived for thousands of years. So you have these religious sects who are also have these political dimensions, and then you have this whole cultural context, and you have the Romans that basically don't understand the people of the land, and you've got these people of the land that they just want to be free, but they don't know how to be free, and they certainly don't have the power to be free. And it is into this context that the angel shows up to Mary and says, "Hail, favored one." Well, how does Mary respond to that? How can this be? I've not yet known a man. Biblical language for sexual intercourse? No. It's not always the case that no is used that way, but it certainly is used that way often enough in the Bible, and the context usually tells us that. And the announcement that's made to her is, this child that you are carrying will save the people. And that salvation probably has, in Mary's mind, some kind of political dimension, although we come to find out as we read the story, it has this other kind of deeply personal, spiritual, and religious dimension. How does Mary respond in that exaltation, that praise to God, that Magnificat? You have regarded the lowly. She says, yeah, this is the thing that's happening, is finally this low estate, my low estate, Mary's a poor girl, my low estate, and your reaching out to me reflects how you are now regarding the poor estate, the poor situation, the malaise, the challenge, the difficulty of all of our people. And what God is then doing in this situation is having mercy. How does he have mercy? He has mercy in Jesus. And there are all kinds of salvation, kinds of dimensions to this, but the essential message, whether one embraces Christianity or whether one doesn't, is that God has chosen in Jesus to demonstrate his mercy. And how does Jesus do that? Certainly acts on behalf of God, empowered by the Spirit, unique position as the divine Son of God, but also preparing the way for us to experience that mercy of forgiveness. And my own theological position is that I need forgiveness. I need forgiveness for the things I say, for the things I do, and for the things I think. I'm not a person that lives with a lot of guilt. I'm a person that lives with some reality. And I know very often, as David said in Psalm 51, my sin is ever before me. I know when I've blown it. And so do most of us, right? And so God regards the state of the lowly, has mercy. He lifts up those who are poor and brings down those that think they're a little bit too good. And in all of this, he's fulfilling prophecy. Why? Because God keeps his word. And that brings us to covenant again a couple of weeks from now. God keeps his word, and the word is in the beginning was to Abraham, I will do this. I will make you a great nation. And we see certainly that Hebrew people, Jewish people, have expanded throughout the course of history from these two little folks, older folks at that, Abraham and Sarah, to a great nation. I will give you a land, and that's been done. At some point, not for this class, we can have a conversation about the present state of Israel, and I've got all kinds of thoughts about that. I'm not a Zionist in terms of thinking that everything Israel does is just okay. So again, we could have a lot of really fruitful conversation about that. But then finally, blessing. I will bring blessing on all of the earth. And most of the earth is poor. God's heart is for the poor. And that's demonstrated in the Magnificat.